The Bahamas. Crystal blue water, white sand, warm air that smells like salt and freedom. For millions of people around the world, the Bahamas is a dream destination, the kind of place you go to escape your problems, not to create new ones. But for one woman, that paradise became the last place she was ever seen alive. Lynette Hooker went out on the water with her husband on a Saturday night. The two of them, a couple, together on a small boat in the dark. He came back. She didn't. And now her husband Brian is under arrest. Her stepdaughter is speaking publicly with serious concerns. Investigators are combing through their history, their boat, and the events of that night. And the entire world is asking a question that nobody has been able to answer yet. Did Lynette fall overboard, or was she never coming back at all? This is the full story. Stay with me. To understand what happened that Saturday night, you need to understand who Lynette Hooker was and the life she and Brian had built together. Lynette and Brian Hooker were a couple connected to the sea. They owned a boat, and not just any boat. They named it the Soulmate. That name matters because it tells you something about how this relationship was presented to the world. These were not strangers on a vessel. This was a husband and wife on a boat they had named after their bond, sailing through one of the most beautiful parts of the ocean on Earth. On a Saturday night in the Bahamas, the two of them set out together on a small 8-foot dinghy. Now, for those who don't know boating, an 8-foot dinghy is not a sturdy, high-sided vessel. It is small, low to the water, designed for short, calm trips, moving between a larger anchored boat and the shore, for example. It is not the kind of boat most experienced sailors would choose for a night journey in rough conditions. And the conditions that night were rough. Winds of 18 to 20 knots, choppy, unpredictable water that pushes and pulls a small vessel without warning. Experienced sailors know what 18 to 20 knots feels like in a dinghy. It is not comfortable, and it is not safe. But Brian says they went out anyway. And Brian's account of what happened next is the center of everything in this investigation. He says Lynette fell overboard. He says he tried to help her. He says he couldn't save her. And eventually, after what must have been a terrifying sequence of events, at least according to his version, he paddled to shore, alone, in the dark. Lynette was never found. When investigators began piecing together the events of that night, questions started to multiply fast, and I mean fast. Brian Hooker was taken into police custody on a Wednesday, several days after Lynette's disappearance, following what was described as a lengthy interrogation. His attorney, Terrell Butler, did not mince words about what the process was like. Butler described it as a harrowing experience, not just the interrogation itself, but also a police-led search of the Soulmate that preceded it. During that search of the vessel, Brian allegedly fell overboard from the boat and sustained knee injuries. His own attorney called the whole sequence distressing. But investigators were focused on something much bigger than Brian's comfort. They were focused on the night Lynette disappeared. Here is what we know. In rough, open water, 18 to 20 knots of wind, remember, Brian and Lynette were in an 8-foot dinghy. When Lynette went into the water, Brian says he was unable to save her. And critically, he did not use the boat's radio to alert other vessels in the area. He did not call the Coast Guard. He did not send a distress signal. He did not attempt to get help from any of the other boats that may have been within range that night. Instead, he paddled to shore, alone, in the dark. And then he reported his wife missing. That sequence, the choice not to call for help, the solo return to shore, the delay before reporting, is what investigators have been pulling apart ever since. Then came the voice that changed the public conversation entirely, and when you hear what she had to say, you'll understand why. Carly Ainsworth is Lynette's stepdaughter, and she went public with her concerns in a way that was impossible to ignore. Calm, specific, and deeply troubling. Carly's first major question was about the radio. On open water, a marine radio is not a luxury, it is a basic piece of safety equipment. And Channel 16, the International Maritime Distress Frequency, is monitored around the clock by the Coast Guard and by vessels across the region. A single call on that channel can bring help within minutes. Every experienced boater knows this. It is not complicated. It is not something you forget in a moment of panic, because in a moment of panic, it is the first thing you reach for. Brian did not reach for it. Carly also raised the question of the rescue attempt itself. In an 8-foot dinghy, you are close to the water. If someone falls overboard, you are not far from them. Carly questioned why Brian could not circle back, throw something for Lynette to grab, extend an R, do anything at all to keep Lynette above water long enough for help to arrive. These are not aggressive questions from a grieving family member looking for someone to blame. These are specific, practical maritime questions, and investigators are asking the exact same ones. And then the history. Because it turns out this was not the first time law enforcement had been involved in Brian and Lynette's relationship. Back in 2015, there was a domestic violence incident in Michigan involving the couple. Both Brian and Lynette made accusations of physical assault against each other. It was a complicated situation, the kind where the truth gets buried under competing claims, and ultimately, charges were dropped by both parties. But here's the thing about history in a case like this. It doesn't go away. Even if charges were dropped, even if both sides told different stories, investigators now have a documented prior incident of conflict between this husband and wife, and that document is sitting inside their case file. Cases like this one live and die on a single question, and it is one of the hardest questions in all of criminal investigation. What does guilty behavior look like versus what does traumatized behavior look like? Because grief and guilt can appear almost identical from the outside. A man who just watched his wife drown in rough water at night, unable to save her, would absolutely be expected to be in shock, disoriented, incapable of thinking clearly, potentially making decisions that don't make rational sense, like paddling to shore instead of calling for help. Trauma does strange things to the human brain. It narrows your vision. It shuts down logical processing. It makes people do things that later they cannot fully explain. That is a real defense, and it is one Brian's legal team could reasonably make. But criminal defense attorney Mauricio Padilla, who analyzed this case in detail, pointed to something that trauma cannot fully explain: the decision to be in that dinghy in the first place. Why were Brian and Lynette in an 8-foot dinghy on an 18 to 20 knot wind on a Saturday night? That is not a spontaneous decision made in the heat of the moment. That is a choice made before they ever left the dock. Padilla called it a major red flag for investigators because it raises the possibility that the dangerous conditions were not an unfortunate coincidence, but a deliberate setting. And then the radio silence. Experienced boaters do not forget the radio. It is not a tool you overlook in a crisis. It is the tool you reach for because of the crisis. Hitting that distress button is instinct. It is muscle memory for anyone who has spent real time on open water. The absence of that call is not explained by panic alone. It is a choice, conscious or not, that left Lynette without any chance of outside help. Whether that choice was the result of frozen panic or something more deliberate is precisely what investigators are trying to determine. Here is the question I want to put to you today, and I want you to really think about this one. If Brian Hooker is telling the complete truth that this was a tragic, terrible accident, that he panicked, that he froze, that he lost his wife in circumstances he could not control, what would you need to see or hear from him to believe it?
because right now, the evidence against him is entirely circumstantial. There is no body, there are no independent witnesses to what happened on that water. There is no recording, no footage, no definitive forensic proof of what occurred in that dinghy on that Saturday night. All investigators have is his account, and a timeline that doesn't sit comfortably with people who understand how the sea works and how boats work. Circumstantial cases have convicted people before, and circumstantial cases have also fallen apart before. The outcome here will likely depend on what else investigators find, on the soulmate, in the financial records, in the digital trail, in the testimony of people who knew Brian and Lynette. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know what you think. I want to be careful here, because I believe in being fair, even in cases where the details are disturbing. Brian Hooker has not been convicted of anything.